environmental group WWF has welcomed the Presidential Climate Commission's recommendation on the future of the country's energy resources. The commission recently submitted recommendations to President Cyril Ramaphosa and government for consideration. Joining us now is James Riela, who is a senior manager for climate action. Thank you for making time for us, James. So the country's electricity planning and management is arguably a contested space. Do you think the Presidential Climate Commission's inputs are clear enough?
Evening, Clement. Yes, we think they're very comprehensive. They've really taken into account a lot of the technical expertise and inputs from different groups and broad stakeholder engagements. And obviously, when we're talking about the Presidential Climate Commission, we're talking fairly long-term planning, but they've made very robust recommendations also for how we deal with the current crisis.
What's clear from the plan is that South Africa must decarbonize its electricity system in order to address a number of critical issues, whether it's issues of human health, international competitiveness, climate change. But how do you balance those commitments with the need to also solve our pressing energy crisis? And some of the ways to resolve this crisis may be at odds with those commitments.
Well, that is a lot of the contention that we're hearing. But actually, when you dig down to it, that's not really the case. So primarily at the moment, obviously, we have this crippling electricity crisis. The fastest way to bring electricity onto the grid is with renewable power. And you supplement that, because obviously it is variable, with energy storage or peaking, which can fill in the gaps. And that can be done very, very quickly, much more quickly than building out new sort of large coal power plants and those sorts of things. And that also addresses a lot of the health issues obviously the long-term, the climate issues that are associated with burning of fossil fuels. So the technical sort of inputs from the Commission are very robust in this regard.
So you've got people who have been pushing for us to extend the lifespan of our power plants, arguing that there's no country in the world where base load is supported by solar. And the example that the electricity minister and even Gwede Mantashe have given is the Komati power station that was decommissioned. In total, they tell us that was giving us about 1,000 megawatts. Now that's been taken out, replaced by wind solar, which guarantee you about 170 to 200 megawatt. And they're asking, where's the math here? We're not at a place where we can replace these power stations and decommission at the speed rate when we don't have the equal amount of renewables that can bridge that gap.
Yeah, nobody is contending that we must take coal out immediately. That's not feasible. But it's also worth bearing in mind that actually the availability factor of the coal plants that we're achieving now, we're hoping to reach is sort of 60%. That would be ideal, but we're nowhere near that. So when you consider that sort of availability factor, renewables are not that bad. And as for the baseload question, it's something of a dated concept. We obviously need to maintain a certain minimum level of supply, but that doesn't require that it comes from a single source. So grids such as Denmark are already achieving up to 67% of their power coming from renewables. We're at 15%. So there's clearly a very, very large potential range that we can supplement with renewables very quickly, and that will do it. And what we must also bear in mind is that a lot of the coal plants that we have are very old and dated. So just to get them to reach their kind of end of life, the 40, 50-year lifespan that they're expected, we still need to fill that gap very quickly, the generation gap with renewables. So the recommendation here is that we build out rapidly the renewables and the peaking support that allows them to fill those gaps. Yeah. And that will allow us to retire these plants as they sort of reach the end of life. But we still need to maintain them now, right? We can't eliminate them immediately.
What do you think is the most effective and rapid short to medium term option for addressing the current electricity crisis?
The biggest problem for us here is obviously how much electricity is available. Solar PV can come on very quickly. Each individual solar panel, if you like, generates electricity immediately. And you compare that to sort of the 10-year to 15-year build rate, build time for Medupi and Kusile, you can bring it on incrementally and very rapidly. What the Presidential Commission has called for is for us to build 5 to 6 gigawatts of renewable energy, that's solar and wind energy, and supplement that with battery storage and other peaking support. So things like pumped storage, and even where needed, small amounts of gas, but that would be just in the final sort of within the peak period between sort of 7 and 8 in the evening. And that means that that's the quickest way we can bring those on. If we can build 5 to 6 gigawatts of renewables, and we know that it can be done within a year, that effectively is the same as, if you like, putting 2 new coal power plants a year. And that is just not feasible. The amount of infrastructural build and lead time needed for that would be significant.
Let's talk about the just energy transition now. How should government ensure that that transition is just, and not only that, but it also brings all the stakeholders on the table in implementing it?
The just transition is obviously where the conversation is at the moment. So worldwide energy systems are transitioning. What we at WWF really want to see is not just this, there's a very narrow, if you like, definition of a just transition, which is just that we need to see those who are employed within the sector, and it's not an insignificant amount, it's a big issue for South Africa, that they have a sort of transition to similarly well-paid and sort of uplifting jobs, but that actually this is an opportunity for South Africa to move away from the paradigm of the fossil fuel heavy mineral energy complex, which hasn't really benefited broadly the people. It's been a very sort of elite group that have benefited, and to make this much more widespread, to really kind of achieve the developmental gains that we've hoped to do. And so when we talk about this just transition, we can think of it in a very limited energy manner, or we can think about it in a much broader economic manner. And the truth is that if we don't decarbonize our electricity supply, a lot of our products are going to be unsellable overseas because of the carbon footprint of them. Yeah. Whereas as we decarbonize, it allows us to build out our industrial base and to build sort of jobs in the support industries that really will kind of uplift the nation. So the concept of a just transition is a critical one for us to take forward.
Yeah, and it's also going to require a lot of money. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're sitting so far with about 130 billion rand in investment, but we're going to need a lot more than that.
Significantly more than that. The truth is that whichever way we look, we need to spend upwards of R1 trillion in the next sort of 5 to 10 years for any manner of sort of fixing the electricity crisis, if you like. But the reality, of course, is how you spend it makes a very big difference in terms of its longevity, in terms of the impact for people. And so, yes, we are committed as South Africa to spending a large amount of money on this process. And it's therefore contingent on us to make sure that the returns are just, they're adequately distributed, but also that they set us up for a long-term, low-carbon economy that will actually enable the sort of upliftment of our people and the protection of our environment. And I think what's also important to note is that we have a certain amount of money that has been committed internationally, and we certainly will be leveraging more of that. And so we have to also think about how do we channel that funding appropriately. So grant funding needs to go to communities where there are no strings attached. There are preferential loans that go to the private sector, and that's all very well, but we still need to think about how do we guide that investment to make sure that we leverage the benefits appropriately.
So when you look at the recommendations of this committee, they highlight the need for, peaking support for a variable renewable electricity mix. But there are those who believe, even in the near term, fossil gas is likely to be a tiny fraction of this, but also it depends on who you ask, because others believe not so tiny, including Gwede Mantashe.
Agreed. And I think it's worth pointing out that the ambition that we're hearing from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is really about, it's not so much about the electricity sector, it's about how do we leverage the fiscal revenue that we might get from a fully fledged offshore gas industry, where we're selling that gas overseas. And to leverage that, what I believe the ministry is hoping to do is to build the gas generation supply here as an anchor tenant. That is effectively de-risks the investment for foreign oil companies. But there is a big risk attached to that, which is that if they don't leverage, if we decide that we cannot afford that, then we actually are still going to have to pay that price. And gas could be a very expensive option. And in terms of the peaking support, the actual quantum of energy that you need to supply for peaking support with renewable energy is very low. And what we're seeing even in Australia at the moment, companies that have specialized in providing that peaking support for variable electricity, historically using gas, are themselves now investing in batteries because they're concerned that the batteries are going to eat their lunch, as it were. It's cheaper now. Renewable energy is the cheapest electricity that has ever been in the world. And so just that sort of additional cost of the storage doesn't raise it to a point where it's very expensive. Whereas gas is very dependent on international markets and can be highly variable in terms of its pricing. And so the question is, what do we want to lock in? And what has been clear from all of the modeling and all of the technical expertise within South Africa and internationally that has gone into the Presidential Commission's report is that the cheapest option available for South Africa to address the electricity crisis is to look at sort of localized peaking support. That means batteries co-located with your renewable energy so that you can provide a constant supply from those locations.
James Reela, Senior Manager for Climate Action, thank you.